Bakhtiar Sanov and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Israel recovers body of the last hostage in Gaza, a development Netanyahu is calling a great achievement. Donald Trump threatens to impose new tariffs on South Korea over trade deal delays. And India and the European Union have sealed a landmark trade deal ending nearly 20 years of negotiations. Israel says on Monday it has recovered the body of the last hostage held in Gaza, a step that could pave the way for a U.S.-backed plan to rebuild and demilitarize the territory.
Israel says the body of the last slain Israeli hostage, Ran Gvili, has been recovered from Gaza by the Israeli army. On Monday, the remains of the police officer and Special Forces veteran were formally identified, ending the search for the final hostage held since the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. The Israeli military began searching a cemetery in Gaza on Sunday after Hamas's armed wing said it had shared details of Gvili's location with mediators. His return fulfills a key requirement of the first phase of US President Donald Trump's peace plan. Gvili had been held for more than 840 days. Israeli officials say the recovery brings long-awaited closure to his family and marks the end of Israel's hostage ordeal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the operation an extraordinary achievement, praising Israeli forces and crediting President Trump with helping secure the release of 20 living hostages earlier under the ceasefire agreement. Speaking in Jerusalem, Netanyahu described Gvili as a hero who continued fighting despite severe injuries before being killed.
But then we had to get another 28 deceased hostages. We got them all out, and there remained one, Ran Gvili. Ran Gvili, from the special unit in the police, who fought not only with a broken arm. He was shot twice, and he kept fighting, and he killed 14 terrorists alone. And then he died, and we said we'd bring him back. He was the first to come in. He's the last to leave, a hero of Israel. Rani is back. There are no more hostages in Gaza. Tremendous achievement for our heroic forces, our soldiers, our commanders. None like them.
In Tel Aviv, crowds gathered at what has become known as Hostages Square, expressing a mix of sorrow, relief, and cautious hope.
One thing I know, peace. Peace. And that's what we should do. I don't know how, I don't know the way. It's the most complicated thing ever, but there's no way to proceed otherwise. We need a solution, and it must be something solid and sustainable, and if we won't believe it, it will never happen.
Israeli officials say the return of hostages' body could allow the limited reopening of Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt. A US-backed committee says the crossing may open this week, though Israel has not confirmed a timeline. The next phase of the plan would focus on rebuilding and fully demilitarizing Gaza, including disarming Hamas, deploying an international stabilization force, and gradually withdrawing Israeli troops. Under President Trump's proposal, Hamas fighters who give up their weapons and commit to peace could receive amnesty, while others would be offered safe passage out of Gaza.
The United States has announced it's raising tariffs on South Korean imports to 25%, accusing Seoul of not living up to a trade deal reached last year. The move has unsettled markets and prompted protests in South Korea, while questions remain over when the new duties will take effect. Here is more on that story.
US President Donald Trump has announced a sharp rise in tariffs on South Korean imports, accusing Seoul's parliament of failing to honor a trade agreement with Washington. In a post on social media on Monday, Trump said tariffs on South Korean imports would be raised from 15 to 25%. He claimed South Korea's legislature had not passed what he called a historic trade deal, despite earlier commitments. Trump said the tariffs would apply to cars, lumber, and pharmaceutical products. The announcement rattled markets in South Korea. Auto shares fell sharply in early trading on Tuesday before recovering some ground. South Koreans voiced their anger over President Trump's tariff hike, with a small group of protesters gathering outside the US Embassy in Seoul on Tuesday. Wearing Trump's masks and holding banners, they denounced the United States and what they described as interference in domestic affairs.
The United States under a second Trump term is really going too far. In South Korea, our laws require public consultation, bipartisan deliberation, and an assessment of whether a measure makes commercial sense. Yet the United States has already unilaterally stated that South Korea's $200 billion investment would go to a nuclear plant in Alaska without going through any investment committee or consultative bodies. This is an act that betrays international good faith and violates basic treaties and the principles of the United Nations. It undermines international law. I urge Trump to stop interfering in South Korea's internal affairs and violating our sovereignty.
Seoul had been working to implement a deal announced in November that was expected to reduce US tariffs on South Korean exports. With all these developments, it remains unclear when the new tariffs will take effect. Analysts say trade terms had already been agreed at presidential level, raising questions over what prompted Trump's latest decision.
Some U.S. federal immigration agents are expected to leave Minneapolis today as pressure mounts after a fatal shooting of an intensive care nurse, Alex Pretty, over the weekend. There has been growing backlash against the administration's immigration crackdown. An investigation into the shooting is currently underway. Here is more on that story.
Federal immigration authorities are beginning to scale back their presence in Minneapolis after days of public anger and political pressure. Officials say Gregory Bovino, a senior Border Patrol commander who led the federal deployment in the city, is expected to leave Minnesota along with some agents as early as Tuesday. Bovino became a central figure in the crackdown and drew heavy criticism after publicly defending the fatal shooting of 37-year-old intensive care nurse Alex Pretty by Border Patrol officers. City and federal officials have offered sharply different accounts of what led to the shooting, which remains under investigation. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey says he spoke directly with President Donald Trump, urging an end to the enforcement surge. He says Trump agreed the situation could not continue and confirmed that some officers would begin withdrawing. Trump later confirmed the call, saying progress was being made. The White House has defended its immigration policy, but described Pretty's death as a tragedy.
Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets. This includes Renee Good, Alex Pretty, the brave men and women of federal law enforcement, and the many Americans who have been victimized at the hands of illegal alien criminals. Saturday's shooting remains under active investigation by Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI. The Customs and Border Protection is also conducting their own internal review.
Protests have continued across Minnesota, including on university campuses. Students at the University of Minnesota staged walkouts and rallies, calling for immigration agents to leave the city.
None of us are going to stop, and we showed up in sub-zero temperatures to show that, and we're not going to stop. It's only going to get easier as it warms up. And the Twin Cities belong to us, it doesn't belong to them, and together we're going to take it back. And I've seen the community come together, and when that happens, I know we're going to get them out, and I know that's the only way this ends.
Federal officials say immigration operations in Minnesota will now be overseen by Trump's border czar Tom Homan, as Homeland Security and FBI investigations into the shooting continue.
Auschwitz survivors and officials paid tribute on Tuesday, marking the 81st anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi German death camp by Soviet troops. Commemorations were held at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum and Memorial, which preserves the former camp built by Nazi Germany on occupied Polish territory during World War II. More than 1.1 million people, most of them Jews, were murdered at Auschwitz, many in gas chambers, while others died from starvation, disease and extreme cold. Between 1941 and 1945, Nazi Germany and its collaborators carried out the systemic murder of around 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe. India and the European Union have sealed what they have called the mother of all trade deals. The free trade agreement and the defense partnership comes as they seek to reduce their reliance on the United States and Chinese economies. Ishan Garg tells us more from New Delhi.
The India-EU Trade Pact took nearly 2 decades to come through. It creates a free trade zone spanning 2 billion people and a quarter of the globe's GDP. Under the agreement, tariffs on over 90% of EU goods exports to India will be eliminated or reduced, saving European companies up to 4 billion euros annually, according to the European Commission. That means lower duties on everything from aircraft, chemicals, pharmaceuticals and also European wine. There's also good news for the EU's automotive market too, with car duties set to fall from 110 to 10% eventually into what's one of the world's fastest growing car markets. But officials here in New Delhi say they are restricting entry of some goods to safeguard vulnerable sectors such as dairy and some agricultural produce. For Indian exporters, the deal opens Europe's vast market to textiles, gems and jewelry and leather products, many of whom officials say will now enjoy zero tariffs as opposed to about 10% earlier, helping exports worth $33 billion heading into Europe. Officials say 99% of Indian products by market value will now have access to the European markets. The agreement will also now be scrutinized by lawyers and needs to be ratified by the European Parliament, and it is now expected to be fully in force by early next year. It is expected to double bilateral trade from roughly $136 billion to $250 billion in the next 5 years. But this isn't just about commerce. India and the EU also signed a security and defense partnership, only the third such agreement the EU bloc has made in Asia after Japan and South Korea. The framework covers maritime security, cyber defense, counter-terrorism, and critically allows India to participate in select European defense projects under the EU's PESCO initiative. This comes as Europe has been racing to reduce its security dependence on Washington as the Trump administration softens its focus on the Indo-Pacific and threatens allies with tariffs. India, meanwhile, is also working to diversify away from Russian military hardware, which still accounts for the bulk of its arsenal. And both are looking to counter China's economic and strategic reach, with officials here saying that India-EU partnership can lower their dependence on other countries. Ishan Garg for A News in New Delhi.
Britain is testing a new balance in its foreign policy as Prime Minister Keir Starmer prepares for talks in China against the backdrop of worsening US-China relations. Our correspondent has more from Manchester.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to travel to China this week in a high-stakes visit aimed at sowing relations with Beijing and boosting Britain's economy at a time of strained ties with the United States. It will be the first visit by a UK leader to China since 2018. The trip comes as China moves ahead with plans for a new expanded embassy in London, a project that has sparked political and security concerns in the UK. Starmer's 4-day visit begins on Wednesday, during which he is due to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Jian, and the country's top legislator Zhou Leji. The Prime Minister will be accompanied by Business Secretary Peter Kyle and a delegation of more than 50 British companies and institutions from sectors including finance, healthcare and manufacturing. Downing Street hopes the visit will unlock new Chinese investment and widen access to the world's second largest economy for UK industries such as financial services, car manufacturing and Scotch whisky. China's Commerce Ministry says trade and investment documents are expected to be signed during the visit, adding Beijing is willing to strengthen communication to create what it called a fair, transparent and rules-based business environment. China's foreign ministry has also struck a welcoming tone, saying Beijing is ready to enhance mutual trust and deepen practical cooperation with Britain, a member of the Group of Seven. But the trip carries political risks. Starmer faces pressure from China hawks at home, who warn closer ties could undermine national security and values. There is also the risk of tension with Washington. US President Donald Trump has been ramping up tariffs and criticism of America's closest allies, and any UK move to deepen economic engagement with China could prompt a sharp response. Analysts say Starmer is walking a diplomatic tightrope. China is no longer just a world's factory, but an increasingly important consumer market, one Britain cannot easily ignore as it searches for growth. For Starmer, the visit is a test of economic pragmatism and of how far Britain can rebalance its China policy without straining relations with its closest security ally. Dina Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
China has signaled its willingness to deepen cooperation with Finland. President Xi Jinping met Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo in Beijing today, calling for stronger mutual trust, improved communication and closer cooperation between the two countries. Prime Minister Orpo is on an official visit to China from January 25th to 28th, holding talks with the Chinese leadership. According to China's state news agency Xinhua, President Xi said China is ready to work with Finland to uphold the international system centered on the United Nations. Xi said he hopes Finland can help improve relations between China and the European Union. Venezuela's National Assembly is moving to approve changes to the country's oil law, as interim President Delcy Rodriguez says investment in oil projects is expected to rise from nearly $900 million last year to around $1.4 billion in 2026 under production sharing contracts.
Venezuela's National Assembly is fast-tracking changes to the country's oil law aimed at opening the sector to more private and foreign investment. The reforms are being pushed by acting President Delcy Rodriguez, who says the move is needed to attract capital and raise production. Speaking in Caracas, Rodriguez said investment under production sharing contracts is expected to rise sharply this year.
We currently have 29 production participation contracts signed. Last year, investment was almost $900 million, and this year, it is projected to reach $1.4 billion.
Rodriguez rejected criticism from US officials, but said Venezuela remains open to relations with Washington based on mutual respect. The proposed reform would weaken the long-standing monopoly of state oil company PDVSA, giving partners more control over operations and oil sales. US officials say sanctions could be eased if political conditions are met, though industry executives say deeper reforms would still be needed.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss what comes next for Minnesota and U.S. immigration policy amid continuing protests and calls for accountability after the fatal shooting in Minneapolis. Stay tuned.
Well, hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Tensions remain high in Minneapolis after the fatal shooting of U.S. citizen Alex Pretty by federal immigration agents during Operation Metro Surge, a nationwide immigration enforcement effort ordered by President Donald Trump. The death at least the second of U.S. citizen during the crackdown has sparked daily protests, a statewide general strike, and national outrage. With protests still ongoing and bipartisan calls for a transparent investigation, we'll explore what comes next for Minnesota and U.S. immigration policy. Joining us now is Daniela Mello, a political scientist who speaks to us from Boston. Daniela, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what does the deployment to Minneapolis and the escalation around Operation Metro Surge signify for a broader Trump administration immigration strategy?
Well, immigration has been the banner issue for this president, as we know. He ran his campaign on being able to close down the border and taking a strict line in finding all undocumented migrants in the United States, especially those who had committed crimes, and being able to deport them out of the country. And in fact, President Trump is proud to say that he has, in fact, closed down the border and fulfilled his promise to his electorate that he would take an aggressive stance. However, we can say that it is very clear from the polls in the United States right now that even Donald Trump's electorate did not expect this level of violence, this level of tension in the streets of American cities, and certainly did not expect that American citizens would fall victim to the tactics of ICE and the Border Patrol in trying to identify and arrest undocumented migrants. So the situation is quite tense. And for the first time, the president finds himself with his banner issue being something that might actually hurt the prospects of the Republican Party in the mid-year elections that we're going to have, not mid-year, November elections that we are going to have this year, which are going to decide the control of Congress and the ability of the president to fulfill his agenda for the next 2 years.
Daniela, with Gregory Bovino stepping back and Tom Homan now on the ground, what might that signal about the White House's approach going forward?
Well, the White House's first reaction to this incident that resulted in the death of Alex Pretty was to side completely with the Department of Homeland Security and with the officers who took these actions. And in fact, there was a sort of narrative of blaming the victim. The victim was accused of showing up armed, presenting a threat to the officers, and basically interfering in the actions of the officers. However, those explanations fly in the face of First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights in the United States, because First Amendment rights allow individuals to protest and to have freedom of speech to protest the behavior of the authorities, even when the authorities are in action. And Second Amendment rights allow, especially in the case of Alex Pretty, he actually had the license to carry a concealed weapon on himself, which means that he received the training and he was legally allowed to carry this weapon. So the administration has in fact backed down in many ways from those initial statements, which were really incendiary and that shocked big swaths of the nation, but certainly shocked Minnesotans who saw in Alex Pretty just an average man who was doing what he saw as his civic duty and was killed. And there was apparent disinterest in the administration in pursuing any sort of real investigation of whether or not the crime had been committed by these officers. So we've seen a softening of the position of the administration over the past few days. There has been some dialogue, which was non-existent previously, some dialogue between the White House and the governor's office. So we know that that Waltz and President Trump had a conversation, and they seem to have come to some sort of an understanding. We don't know the details of that understanding. We know that the replacement of Bovino with Holman was part of that. Everyone is waiting to see whether or not the president will now order some sort of investigation into the case that involves the state authorities that have been kept completely in the black, in the dark, by the Department of Homeland Security and by the FBI. And everyone's waiting to see whether there's actually going to be a drawdown of the troops on the ground in. By troops, I mean the ICE and the Border Patrol that are on the ground in Minneapolis.
So what implications does this situation have for federal, state and federal local relations in law enforcement?
There has been a complete breakdown of the confidence between the state authorities and the state and local authorities and the federal authorities. Just to give a brief explanation, the Department of Homeland Security is led by Kristi Noem, and it's a federal agency. And it supervises ICE and it supervises Border Patrol. So Kristi Noem is really the person who is in charge of these two agencies that are being deployed in American cities in pursuit of undocumented migrants. Normal situations, when an incident like this happened, you would have the local authorities take a very active role in investigating, collecting the evidence, and working side by side with the FBI and the federal authorities to ensure that if an American citizen died, if anyone died, that this was justified by the authorities and that due process is pursued. However, what has happened was 3 weeks ago, when Good was killed in her car, Kristi Noem promised an investigation, then backed down from that promise and decided that no investigation was going to take place. There has been almost zero communication between federal authorities and state authorities. In fact, over the weekend, we heard several interviews with the chief of police of Minneapolis, basically complaining that they had no access to the evidence, that the crime scene had not been secured, so there had been a contamination of the crime scene. And all of this basically has sowed complete distrust in the federal authorities and any type of investigation that they might collect. Just to give you another example, when Governor Waltz called the National Guard to come and help the situation during the weekend, the National Guard actually came and decided to wear vests to differentiate themselves from the federal authorities because they didn't want the population on the ground to think that they were in some way helping ICE or helping Border Patrol. So the tensions are as high as they can be, and the trust is simply not there at this moment.
So how might this incident influence future immigration policy debates in Congress or the 2026 interim elections?
Well, Republicans are mostly concerned with the elections, and clearly this is an issue that Democrats can certainly also capitalize on politically, because this level of discontent obviously can benefit Democrats in the midterms, even though the midterms are still several months away. There's true outrage in the United States about what happened, certainly on the left, but even on the right, as I mentioned previously, even the base of the president seems to disagree with the president on this use of violence and on this surges on the cities, this confrontation with civil society in particular. So the tactics that the president has allowed to go forward don't seem to be working. And that's likely to have a direct effect on the midterms. To give you an example, the Republican candidate for governor made lots of news this weekend because he basically withdrew from the race. And one of the reasons that he stated led to his withdrawal is that he didn't want to be associated with the Republican Party that defended this type of immigration crackdown. So On the midterms, this is likely to have a huge effect if the president does not contain the discontent in the streets over his policies, and if there's not more dialogue and quieting of the tensions, we are likely to see this issue flare up throughout the summer. So there might be a change in the strategy coming from the administration, especially an administration that is afraid that even its own congressmen may distance themselves from the president in an attempt to safeguard their own seats in the races that are coming.
And this is the last question. Could this escalation affect the U.S. international reputation on human rights and due processes?
I think it already has. Anytime that you see a breakdown of trust between the government and citizens, and you see citizens who on paper have the right to protest, have the right to transparency, have the right to due process, be victimized by their government, it erodes the trust in the ability of the United States to maintain its own democratic and its own justice system.
Daniela Melo, thank you very much for your insights and analysis on this deeply consequential issue. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll be able to look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Azerbaijan's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ceyhun Bayramov, has left for China on Tuesday. The visit is part of Bayramov's official diplomatic engagements. Ceyhun Bayramov's visit will be held at the invitation of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. As part of the visit, Bayramov will meet with China's Minister of Foreign Affairs Wang Yi on Wednesday. The official visit of Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister will continue until Thursday. Azerbaijan is taking concrete steps to ensure high-quality internet across its hotels and tourism venues, setting new standards for connectivity in the region. Officials say the initiative, supported by regular audits and certification, will strengthen the country's appeal to both business and leisure travelers while boosting confidence in its digital infrastructure. Our Aysel Ibrahimova has more.
Today is about how Azerbaijan welcomes the world, connected and future-ready. This moment sets a new standard for digital experience in hospitality, making every stay smoother, faster, and truly world-class for its guests.
High-speed internet is now shaping Azerbaijan's ambition to become a trusted global tourism and events destination, as officials and industry leaders move to certify and upgrade connectivity in hotels and venues. The issue was discussed at the Strategic Executive Summit in Baku, hosted by Ookla together with the Information Communication Technologies Agency, the Azerbaijan Tourism Board and the Azerbaijan Hotel Association. Organisers say the initiative is important, as fast, secure connectivity has become a key factor in choosing hotels, planning trips and event tourism. According to the data shared at the event, across the wider Middle East, many luxury hotels still fall below guest expectations for Wi-Fi speed and security. By contrast, Azerbaijan's rapid fiber rollout, which expanded access from around 9% to nearly full coverage in 5 years under the Online Azerbaijan project, lays a strong foundation for high-quality digital services and connectivity.
If you look at the performance in the country, it has definitely increased dramatically over the last 5 years with the initiative of Azerbaijan Online. And so while the fiber connectivity is great and the speeds are very, very strong in the country, often a customer's experience is limited by the Wi-Fi. And I think there's definitely an opportunity to improve the performance that customers get with enhancements that can be made to the Wi-Fi within the building and within hotels.
With this step, Azerbaijan becomes the first country to pilot a new speed test certified approach, designed to deliver a world-class digital experience while generating clear economic and strategic benefits.
In line with the outcomes of this event, over the coming years, we will sign and implement a concrete action plan in cooperation with both government bodies and international organizations to improve the quality of internet services in accommodation facilities across Azerbaijan. The country has recently hosted a number of major international events, and visitors place great importance on the quality of internet services. We will continue to work with the industry from a digitalization perspective to establish Azerbaijan as a trusted destination for event tourism in the future.
The first steps will naturally involve establishing a clear standard. This standard is expected to be developed jointly by both our side and the hotels, creating a common benchmark. Following this, the standard will be implemented and audited in the tourism sector by UCLA. Once the audit is completed, hotels or other venues that meet the criteria will be able to receive the certification, and periodic audits will follow to ensure that the certification is maintained over time.
Participants concluded that improving in-building Wi-Fi and introducing certification with regular audits will strengthen tourist confidence, support business travel, and help position Azerbaijan as a dependable host for international conferences, global events, and long-stay visitors, ultimately contributing to economic growth.
We are proud.
Azerbaijan has sent another shipment of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, continuing its support for the country's infrastructure. This latest aid, consisting of electrical equipment, was dispatched from the Sumgait Technologies Park, a key hub for technology and industry in Azerbaijan. The shipment was organized by the Ministry of Energy in line with an official order signed by President Ilham Aliyev. Azerbaijan has already sent several consignments of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, focusing on helping to restore and maintain its electricity supply. Azerbaijan's State Security Service says it has stopped a planned terrorist attack targeting a foreign embassy in Baku. Officials say several suspects were detained during a security operation.
Azerbaijan's State Security Service says it has arrested several people accused of preparing a terrorist attack against the embassy of a foreign country in Baku. Officials say the operation followed intelligence indicating a serious and immediate threat motivated by religious hostility. According to the State Security Service, the suspects had contact with members of the ISIS-linked Vilayat Khorasan group and worked together to obtain items intended for use as weapons. They were detained by security officers while approaching the area where the embassy is located. Authorities say the suspects have been charged with preparing an act of terrorism and placed in pre-trial detention by a court. The State Security Service says investigations are continuing to determine whether others were involved and to rule out any further threats.
Nearly 5 decades of comprehensive U.S. sanctions have imposed severe economic challenges to Iran's major industries and its citizens, driving up the cost of production and living across the country.
U.S. sanctions have intensified under Washington's so-called maximum pressure campaign, targeting Iran's foreign trade, particularly petrochemical exports. The effort began during Donald Trump's first term and has accelerated since his return to office last year.
Of course, I am more interested in calling what is happening unilateral coercive measures, of which sanctions are one of its branches. In relation to many countries, they are actually using other models, such as the tariff war.
The sanctions now hit Iran's energy, shipping, and financial sectors, with negative effects across society. Protests to rising prices and currency decline last December ignited unrest, which led to death and wounding of thousands of people. Inflation above 50% and a steep currency decline of 90% have pushed up prices and weakened purchasing power. On the factory floor, the United States maximum pressure is tangible. Manufacturers describe facing a constant battle against isolation and rising costs.
The US sanctions, which started a few years ago and have now intensified, have caused us to face many problems in the field of technology transfer and trade with foreign and international companies. These sanctions have severely affected Iran's industries, driving up production costs and leading to higher overall prices.
US sanctions on Iran date back to the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Nearly 5 decades later, those sanctions remain in force. What began with frozen Iranian assets in US banks has since expanded, tied to disputes over Tehran's regional policy, nuclear program, and ballistic missile development. United States is demanding a zero enrichment policy and limiting the range of Iran's missiles to about 500 kilometers. With Iran declaring US conditions as its red lines, there are no promising prospects on easing of US sanctions, let alone removing them in a predictable future. Turad Shiralilu, Tehran, for A News.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot in Ankara. The talks covered trade, security cooperation and regional issues, including Gaza and Syria. The ministers also addressed the welfare of the Turkish community in France, counter-terrorism cooperation, defense industry ties, trade and Turkey's relations with the EU. Turkey continues its diplomatic push to help end the conflict in Gaza. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has met with senior officials from Hamas in Istanbul as part of ongoing efforts to support the ceasefire and the humanitarian response.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with a Hamas delegation on Monday in Istanbul, according to sources from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. The talks focused on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan, the worsening humanitarian situation in the enclave, and broader regional developments. Foreign Minister Fidan reportedly briefed the delegation on Turkey's diplomatic efforts, including its role in the newly formed Board of Peace, a multilateral platform purportedly aimed at ensuring the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. At the meeting, Fidan reportedly stressed that Ankara remains committed to ensuring a steady flow of humanitarian aid into the war-torn region. The current ceasefire agreement, which took effect last October, calls for Hamas and other Palestinian groups to disarm, an additional Israeli withdrawal, and the commencement of large-scale reconstruction efforts. The Board of Peace was announced earlier this month by U.S. President Donald Trump and has been endorsed by the UN Security Council. On Sunday, the Hamas delegation also held talks with Turkish intelligence chief Ibrahim Kalin in Istanbul. This is Adam Mara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
The future of the northern Aral Sea is back on the agenda in Kazakhstan. In Astana, officials from the Kazakh government and the World Bank have discussed how joint projects aimed at restoring the sea will move forward as the region continues to face the long-term consequences of one of Central Asia's most severe environmental crises.
Kazakhstan's Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation Nurjan Nurjigitov met with the World Bank's permanent representative in Kazakhstan, Andrei Mikhnov, to discuss the implementation of joint restoration projects. The focus was on the Northern Aral Sea Preservation Project. It includes the reconstruction of the Kokaral Dam, which is expected to help raise water levels. Project documentation is now close to completion. For Kazakhstan, the Northern Aral is no longer just an environmental issue. It affects people's livelihoods, employment in the region, agricultural sustainability, and the overall state of local ecosystems. In this context, the World Bank's involvement is seen as a logical continuation of ongoing efforts. The first phase of the project has already delivered tangible results. According to the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, water levels in the northern Aral Sea have increased by 42%, while annual fish catches have reached 8,000 tons. The next goal is set for the coming 5 years. Kazakhstan, together with Uzbekistan, plans to increase the volume of water in the northern Aral Sea to 34 cubic kilometers. Authorities say the two sides have agreed on a stable inflow of water, including during low water periods. And despite these efforts, the drying up of the Aral Sea remains the largest environmental disaster in Central Asia. Since the 1960s, its surface area has shrunk almost ninefold, water levels have fallen threefold, and water volume has decreased by about 15 times. Each year, around 100 million tons of salty dust rise from the dried seabed and spread across the region. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the UN's warning on global water bankruptcy and what it means for long-term water security worldwide. See you shortly.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News. The world may be facing something far more severe than a water crisis. A new United Nations report warns that humanity has entered an era of global water bankruptcy, where rivers, aquifers, lakes and glaciers are being damaged beyond recovery, pushing billions into long-term water insecurity. The findings suggest this is no longer a temporary challenge, but a structural breakdown of the global water system. To unpack the implications of this report and what it means for global stability, food security and geopolitics, I'm joined by Vadim Ni, co-founder of the Save the Caspian Sea movement, director of the Socio-Ecological Fund from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Vadim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me for today's bulletin.
So, Vadim, the UN report introduces the term water bankruptcy. How is this different from what we have long called water stress or water crisis?
Because we have already in front of us the shrinkage of the main water reservoirs in Kazakhstan. It concerns the Caspian Sea. The Aral Sea is already long-standing crisis, which to some extent we're trying to mitigate by restoring the northern Aral Sea. And the same fate we are experiencing with the Balkhash Lake. So it's the three biggest reservoirs in Kazakhstan. So while the global level we're worrying about the sea rise level, in this case we are experiencing the opposite. The level of lakes is going down.
So Vadim, the report says many water systems are now beyond recovery. From a scientific perspective, what makes this damage irreversible?
Because the the rising temperatures, they are led to the change in precipitation. In some, for some lakes, we have no anymore enough level of precipitation. The consumption of water is decreasing for many sectors of economy, including the, agriculture. And also there is rising competition for water among sectors, among countries, and for many lakes, actually, we have no possibilities to restore or support the previous level of the water.
So also in the report, groundwater depletion is described as draining humanity's water savings. How dangerous is our reliance on groundwater today?
I think we are relying still on groundwater first for irrigation. Yeah, that's for some of the region of Kazakhstan, almost 90, even more percent is for irrigation. And that's in many areas we have no other sources for drinking water supply. And then it means that we should adapt the level of ambitions with agricultural production, which is also important for food security, according to the water available for the agricultural development.
Vadim, nearly half of the world's population faces severe water scarcity and at least 1 month a year. Why isn't this translating into a stronger sense of global urgency?
Because it's repeating more and more, not like in the past when we are associated with droughts, which changed with the periods when water was more available. Now it's almost every year we have different kind of experiences and consequences of heat waves and global warming. It's almost every year, all droughts or forest fires in Kazakhstan. So it's obvious that it's not the it's just seasonal or periodic extreme weather extreme events. It's almost for every year the same situation.
But we are also seeing some cities sink due to groundwater overuse. Should this be treated as a climate issue, an urban planning failure, or a security risk?
It's, of course, the population is growing, economies are growing, and it means more water is needed both for economies and population. But we are not trying to adapt to the water shortage. We're still water intensive in agriculture, in economy. We are not using in cleaning the wastewater for use, for circular use of water. That's why it's even more crisis for us than it could be.
So in your view, how does water insecurity increase the risk of conflict, displacement, and regional instability?
It was always the case for our countries, despite that significant efforts were taken to prevent potential water conflicts, because it's a direct competition for water. When people from one border or another border, they see that this water is not enough for them. But then they trying to blame the other sides for the shortage of water and use and keep more water for themselves. That is the source of potential conflicts. It just simplified picture which you can see at the level of bordering communities, but it's almost the same picture on the level of countries or regions, which are also competing for decreasing volume of water.
Vadim, thank you very much for your insights and for helping us understand the scale of this challenge. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's all we have for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more. Thanks a lot.